Hey everyone, Nubkeks here, and in today's video we've got an awesome boss from the 9.1 PTR where we're checking out the Sanctum of Domination, the new raid coming in 9.1. This is actually the third boss of the raid, and it is called the 9. And the idea here is that you're fighting the 9 Valkyrs that serve Sylvanas. Now, what actually happens, which is really interesting way they've laid out this fight, is that you actually physically fight 3 of them, and then the other 6 come in periodically and do these big, I would call them like archetypes of raid mechanics. You'll see exactly what I mean as we go through it. To start off the fight, though, you are fighting Signy and Kyra, 2 of these bosses at once. The third boss doesn't arrive until later, and each of these bosses has their own sort of core mechanic. One of the bosses has a bunch of spells that you need to interrupt. I think the other boss summons in an ad, this ooze blob ad, periodically. On heroic, it was very CCable, so we were able to simply, kick it, stun it, grip it in, knock it in, stack it under the bosses, and cleave it down, this formless mass. So it's not too bad. On top of that as well, each of these bosses has their full energy mechanic, which they do periodically throughout the fight. One of the bosses will attempt to suck you towards the boss, and if you are too close to the boss, when her cast finishes, it explodes and basically kills you. The other boss will attempt to push you away, so you need to be close to her before the cast finishes, or else it will explode and kill you. This was kind of funny because I don't know, I think they must have been running into some bugs with this ability, because the push and pull of these effects was extremely slow. Like literally you would just barely move to the effect that they would channel for 5 seconds, and you would move about 1 foot, right? You would barely move at all. In fact, if nobody told you that the mechanic was actually pushing or pulling you, you might not even notice that it was. So that certainly, I think, will be scaled up. I imagine it must have been causing some bugs, so they just said, you know what, screw it, just turn it down to almost 0 here for the sake of this testing, just to get the testing done, would be my thoughts. Where this starts to get extra spicy, though, is with the other 6 Valkyr. We'll come to the third Valkyr in a second, but the other 6, the 6 that you never directly fight, but that come in and each do their own, again, sort of traditional raid mechanic. They each have one. That is what makes the fight very, very interesting. So one of them that will be very familiar to those of us who played through Castle Nathria and did Sire Denathrius, it's literally the massacre effect from Sire Denathrius, right? A bunch of these lines are going to appear across the floor, these big grey lines this time, not red like they were in Sire Denathrius. And then after a couple of seconds, that the line will just kill anyone that's standing in it. So it's avoiding those lines. Another mechanic is a soak, right? So there's going to be this big icy blast that's going to target one particular player, and they can move around with it. And then it does a massive chunk of damage that's split evenly across all the players who are standing within the circle. So everyone gets in and splits the damage. If you have been missing soaks in your raid since Tomb of Sargeras, you say, man, I wish there was more things like Tomb of Sargeras. Don't worry, there are these soak mechanics as well. For us, there were these 4 small purple circles which would appear spaced around the room. At least one person had to stand in each circle before it exploded. It would do a moderate chunk of damage to them. Obviously, if nobody stood in a circle, though, it would erupt and basically absolutely clap everyone in the raid. So yeah, 1 person per circle. 1 person per circle. You know what I'm talking about. You've been in Tomb of Sargeras before. Another classic mechanic would be these massive bombardment zones. So basically, the boss would target players. They'd have the massive circle around them, and then after a good chunk of time, it would drop a bomb on that location, which would explode to anyone who's within it. So again, just drop them out to the sides. Don't drop them on top of other players. So those are 4, obviously, mechanics you've encountered a lot before. There were a couple that were a bit more unusual. So one that was quite interesting was that the boss would create this big shielding area on the ground, right? That would give the boss 90% damage reduction, or any of the ads or anything that was alive. They would all get 90% damage reduction in that area, right? So you have to try to place those out. I think it would drop centered on the bosses that you're currently fighting, and then pull them outside of that area. It wouldn't last forever, but yeah, you had to make sure that they weren't there. And then another mechanic going back, actually returning to a familiar mechanic. There was this debuff that would build up over 6 seconds. Small circles around everyone. After 6 seconds, it explodes and it cleaves anyone that's nearby. It's the spread mechanic, right? So I think that's quite funny, actually. I think it's quite funny. For me, this is the kitchen sink boss. It's like, yes, all the traditional raid mechanics have one of each, and they will happen at random times, in random patterns, in random overlaps, okay? Do the thing where you all have to soak together, but also watch out for massacre lines. But also be moving the boss out of this thing. Make sure you spread out for the spread mechanic. Make sure to drop the big explosion things outside. You know, it's raiding 101, and you get a bit of everything here on this fight on the 9. Where this fight gets very spicy, though, is actually the transition into stage 2. This is where things go nutty. So whenever you bring one of those first 2 initial bosses to 15% health, then the 3rd Valkyr arrives, and she has about as much health as those first 2 put together, so she is way tougher. And obviously when she arrives in, yeah, you should have both of those other bosses down at about 15% health, but that is where things get very spicy, because now you've got 3 of these bosses, each with their abilities, all of them going off at the same time. So it's actually sort of in the middle of the fight where you have this really intense moment. What does this boss do? Well, she has a few fairly significant mechanics. So one of them, which is called Link Essence, she'll link a few different players together for about 30 seconds. And whenever they take damage, that will split then. It will basically duplicate any damage that any of those players take and split it amongst everyone that is linked with them. So essentially this means that, you know, players that have Link Essence have to be super careful, make sure to use defensives if they are going to take damage from something, possibly even avoid doing other mechanics in the fight that would involve taking damage, because it is going to just replicate that damage onto other players and maybe kill them. Her most interesting mechanic for me actually were the Fragments of Destiny. So this would put dots on, I think it was on 3 different players for us with our raid size of about 20 people. It was on about 3 different players. Whenever you dispel this mechanic, it would jump to the nearest player to them. Now this debuff is just doing a fairly hefty tick of frost damage every single second, and obviously it gets quite dangerous then when you stack it on the same person. Now what was interesting about this was basically when you get them all onto the same person, though, by dispelling and making sure they're all stacked on one person, whenever you dispel that person, if they have all of the current Fragments of Destiny on them, it will just be removed and it will leave this permanent ice patch on the ground. Like, our team was actually quite clever. They came up with a nice little strategy where they would essentially position a priest, a healer priest, in the middle of the 3 different players. She would mass dispel her all of them, and because she was closest to each of them individually, all of the fragments would instantly jump onto her. They would move out of the way, and then she would just dispel herself and then drop the ice patch on the ground. And that was just a really quick way to deal with it. And I think the raid leader was dropping markers like in the particular pattern and all of that. So it was actually really coordinated and very clever. So that does seem to be, generally speaking, the way to deal with it. The easiest way is just have, you know, everyone with those Fragments of Destiny stack up together, dispel them, and then dispel the person that it all jumps to and drop the pool. On top of that, then she has this ability, Word of Recall, where she basically brings back all of the Call of the Valkyr stuff that has already happened. And yeah, this just gets kind of crazy. She just keeps basically adding stuff in, right? So you start having more and more of those kitchen sink raiding mechanics just get added in this sort of final phase, which is quite cool. So essentially it turns into the single target boss burn, where you are just handling those fragments of destiny, making sure to do those dispels properly. And then you just again, you have all those general raid mechanics just overlapping more and more. So you're going to have to do a soak at the exact same time that you're going to have to dodge massacre lines, and there's more massacre lines, and yeah, just everything starts overlapping, and it's quite fun. What sort of specs are going to be good on this fight? Obviously priests with mass dispel, you're going to want to have at least one to be able to deal with that. It could be a shadow priest or it could be a healer priest. It doesn't really matter. So having one priest seems like it's going to be basically essential. Having a death knight that can grip in the blob ad during P1, like when you're fighting the initial 2 bosses, that also seems really, really important. And obviously bringing AMZ to help with the soak, stuff like that, is great too. Other than that, again, in P1, because you're fighting 2 of those bosses at once, classes with really good cleave damage, especially 2 target or 3 target cleave, will do very, very well there. Although that is that being said, that's definitely the easiest part of the fight. I think where cleave classes actually really shine is in arguably the hardest part of the fight, which is that midpoint where you get the first two bosses down low on life to like 15% health, and then you get the third boss comes in. So for me at that point, I'm thinking warriors could be great, right? Just start cleaving condemns all over the place, to absolutely nuke those bosses and actually execute them and kill them off. That execute cleave, that sort of thing could be very strong there. And then the final phase of the boss, the final half, ends up being mostly a single target thing. So, and I think that is more important. So yeah, I'm thinking about specs with cleave, execute, and single target would be the best. That being said, it is the third boss, so that sort of min-maxing won't be necessary, but just to give you an idea for the sort of stuff that is looking good. In terms of fun, I really was impressed by this boss. This boss is awesome. I hope I'm not being too mean, but I generally feel that the third bosses of raids are often, they can be a little bit of a dud, I think. Sometimes they can be some of the weaker bosses, but this one is great. This one is really fun. There's a whole bunch of mechanics going on. You've got a bunch of different points of the fight where things are really cool. So, you've got your really big paddy phase 1 where you can it's not too hard and you can get all that cleave damage in and just start nuking stuff down. And then you've got this big spike of difficulty when you do go and phase things through, and you're probably going to pop Bloodlust and start cleaving everything down, and there's loads of bosses, there's loads of shit going on. And then again, as the fight goes on, and you're just fighting that last Valkyr, but she's calling in all of her 6 buddies to do all their random mechanics, and that gets really intense as well. There's a whole bunch of stuff going on. Yeah, it's just cool. There's just a lot of stuff. It's not too hard. None of it is too difficult. Nothing too crazy here. It's all very doable, but there's just a lot of stuff. There's lots of stuff going on. All the different sections of the fight actually feel quite different, and I think that's cool. So yeah, to me, this is a wonderful first boss, visually cool as well. Yeah, it's just great. Really, really good. So there you are, guys. The 9, the kitchen sink. Let me know what you think. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you next time, because we are actually going in fact, by the time I think I space these videos out one a day. So when you are watching this, I am actually probably at the very same time or around about going in and doing some mythic testing on the first 2 bosses of the raid, which are also looking like really fun bosses as well. So make sure to come back and check that out over the next couple of days as I put those videos up on YouTube. And as always, thank you for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.